Why do some companies create seemingly insurmountable advantages whilst others, often with more resources, slowly fade away into irrelevance? So, for the past decade, we've worked with leadership teams of varying sizes and geographies, and we've seen this pattern play out again and again. So, today, I'm going to show you the hidden but obvious mathematics behind compounding advantage and why some companies leave 10 times growth on the table, and more importantly, what you can do about it. Let's talk about your team right now, your talented, committed, hard-working team. They've got about 15 and a half potential hours per week, according to the research, to move your strategic goals forward. So that's not 40 hours, that's not even 20, 15 and a half. So where does the time go? Well, 30% or so disappears into email, 20% into meetings, another 10% or so on comms and admin. And then there's this huge time penalty that comes with context switching and those constant interruptions that we're all exposed to. So think about that for a moment. Your people aren't lazy, they're not uncommitted, but they're probably drowning. And only 1/3 of their time is actually building the future that you've asked them to create. This isn't just inefficiency. You could actually argue that this is organizational sabotage at scale. And here's the brutal truth that strategy consultants like myself need to talk more about. Perfect strategy times zero time obviously equals zero progress. You can have the most brilliant strategy in the world. You can hire the most competent consultants, and you can craft the most elegant strategic plan. But if your organization has no time to execute it, you've bought yourself an expensive doorstop. Goals don't just stagnate without execution time. They starve, they die. And your competitors, who might have a good enough strategy, but actually have time to execute, they're eating your lunch. Now, before you think this is hopeless, here's the good news. This isn't theory. This is validated by the world's leading institutions, the people you know. MIT, McKinsey, Bain. There are proven multipliers that can transform productivity. So I'm talking about things like goal clarity, team topologies, making decision-making easier, faster, having fewer better meetings, protecting flow states, using AI and automation to speed productivity. But right now, it's a good chance your people are drowning in overhead while your strategic work starves. And every day you wait, talent burns out and competitors will be moving. And that's just half of the problem. Do you want to know how many priorities the average company considers top priorities? Well, it's 7 or more. And you will have heard the phrase, when everything's a priority, nothing is. Well, that's true. Research says that 3 to 5 priorities, maximum, ruthlessly enforced is the way to go. And when I talk about research, every institution that studies this, MIT, Bain, McKinsey, as well as every leader that you probably know, Jobs, Buffett, Bezos, etc., they all say the same thing. And our team sees this reality every single week. So here's my question for you. How many quarters of some progress on everything, breakthroughs on little, maybe nothing, can you afford before your board, your customers, or even your team decides that they've had enough? Here's what we've learned. Business success comes from exactly 2 levers: choice quality and execution efficiency. Choice quality is about having strategic clarity about which battles to fight, selecting the right things at every level, and having tactical influence on daily decisions, and then having those adaptive metrics and signals that tell you when to change course. Execution efficiency is about doing those things with minimum waste and drag and maximum enablers, things like AI. Creating the organizational capacity to deliver. What you find is most companies optimize one or the other, yet the magic happens when you optimize both. So here's the critical insight that for me changes everything. These don't add together, they multiply. A 20% improvement in choice times a 20% improvement in execution equals not 40%, but 44%. It's not additive, it multiplies and compounds through time. Every quarter, every year, this compounds. So let me say this again. When you improve both dimensions simultaneously, the results compound exponentially. But this multiplication works in both directions. When poor choices multiply and execution is fragmented, organizations don't just stagnate. They enter what we call compound drag. 7+ competing priorities, no focused strategy, no not-to-do list, what we call strategic whiplash, that kind of constant changing of direction, the fear of missing out driven decisions, when everything's urgent, nothing's important. And this is multiplied by constant context switching, back-to-back meetings, little focus time, low energy from the team, fatigue. This equals a downward spiral. So let me show you the mathematics of this decline. An organization declining just 5% per quarter in each of those two dimensions. So that's 0.95 times 0.95 equals 0.9, and that's a 10% decline in Q1. After 1 year, that's 0.66, a 34% decline. After year 2, 55%. Meanwhile, a more focused competitor, let's get them improving at the same rate, just 5% per quarter. They're at 3.92. And then after 2 years, it's times 9, and it just gets worse from there. So are you in compound drag? Do you think that you're in compound drag right now? Can your employees name your top 3 priorities, for example? Are your people working extra hours just to keep their head above water? Are you losing market share? Are you losing opportunities to more focused competitors? Do projects take much longer than you'd planned? Are people exhausted but can't actually point to meaningful, measurable progress? If you're nodding along to any of these, you're probably feeling that compound drag, and it's probably getting worse every quarter. So this isn't theory. It feels like, but it isn't consultant speak. Organizations excelling in both dimensions achieve 3 to 4 times financial outperformance compared to their peers. There's a 95% correlation between decision effectiveness and financial success, and that data is overwhelming. So the question isn't whether this works. The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes. Now let's talk about what good choices actually mean. Strategy is the explicit choices that you make in order to win. And here's what makes this really hard. Every business leader faces a unique strategic landscape. A startup finding product market fit faces completely different choices than a Fortune 500 company managing those legacy portfolios. Recruiting for a culture is different from transforming those deeply entrenched how we do things here moments. And an emerging market with no competitors requires different choices than a saturated market with some really big dominant players. So what do we mean by choice quality? Strategic clarity, which 3 to 5 battles you can actually fight and win. Tactical influence, changing those thousands of daily decisions that we have to make in order to be aligned. But it's easy because we know the strategy. And that ability to be adaptive, measuring those signals that tell us when change is needed. Organizations with 3 to 5 strategic priorities, by the way, grow 3 to 5 times faster than those with 7 or more. Not a little faster, 3 times. So let me give you an example. Gymshark. They're a 1.3 billion brand that Nike and Adidas, with all their resources and all of their brand power and all of their distribution, couldn't stop. How? It's about superior choice quality. They didn't try and be Nike. They made explicit choices about who they served and how they reached them and what they stood for. And then they executed with laser focus. So while Nike was optimizing for everyone, Gymshark chose gym-going millennials and built a community-driven brand through influencer partnerships that the giants could never prioritize. What about Blockbuster, a shop that when I was at university I used to work at? Here's what most people don't know. Blockbuster knew what was coming. They understood streaming. They saw Netflix. They had the resources, the brand, and the customer base. They knew what choices to make, but they couldn't execute. Legacy systems, entrenched interests, organizational inertia, store franchises that would fight any shift to digital. Late fee revenue they just couldn't give up. This is a perfect example of the knowing and doing gap. When you study how smaller companies actually beat massive incumbents, you see something fascinating. It's not that they executed better, it's that they made choices that turned the incumbents' greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. Let me show you exactly what I mean. So when DoorDash, the US delivery firm, launched in 2010, the food delivery war was already raging. Grubhub dominated the big cities. Uber Eats was spending hundreds of millions in Manhattan and San Fran. And every analyst said the same thing. This market is saturated, you're too late. DoorDash looked at the same market and said, we're not going to compete there at all. We're going to start in Palo Alto suburbs. So for a moment, think about what that means strategically. A suburban market might generate $5 million in annual revenue. Sure, that's real money, but to Grubhub already doing $1 billion in revenue, this is background noise. Below their materiality threshold, the minimum size opportunity worth allocating resources to. You see, when you're $1 billion company, you literally can't pursue $5 million opportunities. Your regional VP won't take the meeting. Your sales team can't justify the commission structure. Your engineering team won't build suburb-specific routing algorithms for just 0.5% of revenue. So while Grubhub and Uber fought over the same Manhattan restaurant, spending millions undercutting each other, DoorDash quietly built something different. Data-driven routing, optimized for suburbs where deliveries are spread out. Deep partnerships with local restaurants that would never reach the volume threshold the big players demanded. Algorithms that could predict when a family in Palo Alto would order dinner. Market by market, suburb by suburb, each one too small for the incumbents to care about. Until suddenly DoorDash had scale and the technology built for 100 small markets that worked better than the technology built for 10 big ones. Fast forward to today, 67% US market share. The incumbents who ignored them because they were too small, they're now too far behind to catch up. So that's pattern one, what we call below the materiality threshold. Target opportunities that incumbents literally cannot pursue because their scale becomes a disadvantage. So what about Stripe versus PayPal in payments? In 2010, PayPal was the giant, dominant. And they were brilliantly optimized for their customers, merchants, business units, people who needed enterprise solutions, compliance, departments, and account managers. Stripe's founder asked a different question. What if we built payments for developers instead? Think about what that meant. PayPal's customer base was a business manager who needed dashboards, phone support, and integration consultants. That's what they'd spent 15 years perfecting. A developer wants exactly the opposite. They want to read documentation at 2 a.m. and have payments working by 3 a.m., 7 lines of code, no phone calls, no account managers. Just beautiful API documentation and Slack Overflow answers. Could PayPal have built this? Technically, of course, yes. Organizationally, impossible. Their entire sales force was optimized for enterprise deals. Their product team built features that merchants requested. Their support team was structured for high-touch relationships. Their pricing model, that required volume commitments. To serve developers the way Stripe did, PayPal would have had to have abandoned everything that made it successful with merchants. In 2010, the developer market was tiny, maybe a few billion in total payments. That's not worth disrupting if you're a 10 billion enterprise business. But developers build the future. Every SaaS company, every marketplace, every mobile app, all built by developers who choose Stripe because it was built for them. Again, fast forward to today, 95 billion valuation, serving what PayPal dismissed as too small, the developer market that became the entire digital economy. And that's pattern 2, wrong customer optimization. Serve a segment incumbents aren't structurally designed to serve well. Their existing optimization creates friction that they can't easily fix without breaking what already works. Now let's talk about a favorite of mine, Viva. So in 2007, nobody was worried about Viva. Salesforce was the £500 gorilla, the CRM king. 30 billion in revenue. Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, all giants competing in the enterprise software space. And pharmaceutical clinical trial management, well, maybe this was 200 million as a market size. So do the maths. 200 million is less than 1% of Salesforce's 30 billion revenue. It's not material, and it's below the threshold where their board would even discuss it. Viva's founder made a radical bet. We're going all in on life sciences, only clinical trials. We're going to know FDA regulations better than the FDA. We're going to understand trial protocols better than pharma companies. We're going to build the perfect solution for this one thing. This meant hiring people who'd actually run clinical trials, building features for regulatory submission workflows, creating integrations for lab information management systems. Could Salesforce have done this? Sure. But why would they? To build that depth of domain expertise for 0.7% of their revenue. To create a specialized product that couldn't be resold to their banking customers, retail customers, or manufacturing customers. The specialization created executional advantages that Salesforce couldn't match without abandoning its entire business model. Viva's customer success team spoke the language of clinical trials. Their roadmap was driven by FDA regulation changes. Their whole company breathed life science. So within 3 years, they had 55% market share in clinical trial management. And here's where it gets interesting. Once they dominated one too small niche, they moved into the adjacent niches. Regulatory affairs, quality management, medical affairs, commercial ops. 25 niches later, each one too small for Salesforce to prioritize. 33 billion market cap. They own life sciences. So that's pattern 3. Structural advantage through specialization. It's that deep focus that incumbents can't match. Not incremental improvement, compound execution advantages that widen over time. 3 companies, 3 industries, but notice the pattern. These aren't stories of better execution of the same thing. They're structural asymmetries in which the incumbent's most significant advantage, their scale, existing customers, and of course their infrastructure, became fatal liabilities in this new context. DoorDash succeeded because they were small enough to care about suburbs. Stripe succeeded because they had no legacy merchant relationships to protect. And Viva succeeded because they could specialize in a way that Salesforce never could. The question isn't how do we compete with incumbents who have more resource. The question is what opportunities exist when their resources become constraints. Where does their optimization for existing customers create blind spots? Where does their scale make them too slow to move? That's strategic choice quality, not fighting battles on their terms, but creating new battlefields where their advantages don't apply, or better yet, actively hurt them. And then multiplying that by executional efficiency they literally cannot match without abandoning everything that made them successful. All of this is obvious, right? In hindsight, of course, those were good strategies. And you're right, they are obvious. Want to know something fascinating? PayPal, of course, knew about developers. They'd been asked about better APIs for years. Grubhub, of course, they knew about suburban opportunities. They'd looked at the data, and naturally, Salesforce knew about industry-specific needs. They'd heard the requests. So the problem often isn't knowledge, it's execution. This is the knowing-doing gap that kills more companies than bad strategy ever will. So I'd like to talk about what makes a good choice, a good strategic choice. And honestly, it depends entirely on your context. We work with many different types of company. So if you're a startup, which market, which customer problem do you ship or iterate? If you are one of those incumbents, do you disrupt yourself or optimize your core? Do you acquire? Do you build? If you're in turnaround mode, what must we stop? What do we focus our limited resources on? Perhaps you're a scale-up. Which processes do you standardize? How fast do you choose to grow? These specific choices vary dramatically. But here's what doesn't change. The planning process and the method of optimizing choices is universal. You target unique value for a highly specific group of customers. You create and look for compounding advantages. Amongst your team and amongst the data, you try and reduce cognitive biases systematically. You make sure that high quality information feeds your decisions. But of course, you still need creativity. You create feedback loops to learn from outcomes. You optimize strategic, tactical, and adaptive decision making. And this process works whether you're a 3-person startup or you're a big Fortune 500 or somewhere in between. Now, if you're watching this and your organization is in severe decline, you may need more than just optimization. You probably need something that is often called a strategic transformation. What do I mean by severe decline? Well, if you're growing 3 to 5%, for example, where market leaders are perhaps growing at 10 to 30%, and you're losing talent to competitors, your customer acquisition cost is approaching that lifetime value number, maybe your technology gap is also widening. Maybe you're not in crisis yet, but the mathematics that we showed earlier, you're probably living them. The good news is there are proven paths out. Here are 7 distinct strategic responses, each viable under specific conditions. The bad news is you must choose one, commit fully, and execute with discipline for 4, 5, 6, 7 years perhaps. And half measures don't just fail slowly, they fail catastrophically. So let me show you some of your options. There are 3 types of strategic response typically: offensive, repositioning, and acceptance strategies. So the first is go head-to-head, do a head-to-head transformation. This is the boldest choice. You rebuild your technology foundation to compete directly with the market leader on speed and cost structure. So think about Nadella at Microsoft. They had a legacy Windows and Office infrastructure built over 30 years, and he said, we're rebuilding everything for cloud first, what we know as Azure. 8 times market cap growth now, but it took 8 to 10 years and it cost billions. And it required destroying the very division that had made Microsoft successful. So this strategy requires a number of years, say 7 plus, and what they call patient capital. A CEO that's committed to staying the entire journey, board patience for years, and suppress margins whilst you rebuild and do a significant transformation investment. So can you raise that capital? Will your board wait that number of years? Do you have that CEO? If this isn't your path, there is a second good option. It's what we call a specialist aggregator, where you're going for niche domination. So this is what Viva did. Own 5 to 7 niches worth somewhere in the order of 50 to 200 million each that the market leaders ignore. Build a 500 million, 1 billion business from aggregated specialist positions. And the beauty of this strategy, each niche is below that materiality threshold for market leaders. They can't justify allocating resources to it. But for you, it's your entire focus. So that pattern, dominate niche 1. Use that cash and capability to enter 2, then 3, then 4. Each one compounds on the last because your platform transfers across niches. So this requires domain expertise in your first niche, the discipline to say no to everything else, and 5 to 7 years to build that whole portfolio. But do you need billions in capital? No, probably not. You need focus. So what's the third option? It's geographic domination. Own 2 or 3 regions worth, again, similar numbers, maybe 2 to 500 million each, that the market leaders deprioritize. So maybe you're based in Southeast Asia and the US market leader has a weak presence there. Or you dominate in the Midwest in the US while coastal companies ignore it. Or you own specific European markets where regulations favor local players. Geographic proximity, local relationships, regulatory knowledge, language, culture, these create moats that are hard for distant competitors to overcome. Again, it takes time, maybe 4, 5, 6 years. You need an existing regional foothold and you need market leaders to genuinely deprioritize these regions and not just be temporarily distracted. If offensive strategies aren't viable, there are repositioning options that preserve and grow value just differently. So this is the fourth option. Become infrastructure that powers others instead of competing directly. So you've built great technology, but you can't beat the market leader in the end-to-end customer battle. So instead, license your technology to other companies. Become the platform they build on. Twilio did this. Instead of building communications apps, they became the API that powers everyone else's comms. Stripe did this for payments. AWS did this for computing. So this requires genuinely valuable proprietary technology that others want, the organizational discipline to support a platform business, and you've guessed it, time, usually in the region of, you've guessed it, 5, 6, 7 years to build the ecosystem. You'll have a completely different business model at the end. Smaller revenue per customer, but many more customers. The fifth option, move dramatically upmarket. Serve only high-value customers with deep white glove service. Your revenue might drop, maybe as much as 20, 30%, but your margins will increase. Perhaps they're in the region of 50 to 100%. You'll probably have to fire your bottom 60% of customers and invest everything in the top 20%. Charge a premium. Provide a service competitors cannot match. So think Adobe's enterprise business, Salesforce's financial services cloud. These aren't competing on features, they're competing on deep expertise and personalized service. And this takes 2 to 3 years. You need genuine expertise that justifies premium pricing and customers who value that expertise way more than cost. And more importantly, you need the courage to fire as much as 60% of your revenue. And then there is just acceptance strategies. Not giving up, but accepting market realities and optimizing accordingly. Like chasing operational excellence, with on efficiency, reliability, when you can't differentiate on features. So you're in a commodity market, feature parity exists, innovation doesn't create advantage anymore. So you compete on being 20% cheaper, being nearly 100% reliable, being operationally excellent. So think Southwest Airlines. They don't have the fanciest planes, but they have the most efficient operations and the lowest cost structure. Again, this takes years to build a true operational advantage. You'll need a culture that celebrates efficiency, not innovation. And you'll need scale or process excellence that actually is able to achieve cost leadership. And lastly, really, it's cash flow harvest. You maximize cash extraction over many years, maybe as many as 5 to 10, before an eventual exit from the market. This is the acceptance that you will decline, but you're going to do it profitably. So you'll do things like stop growth investment, cut R&D to those minimum maintenance levels. You'll raise prices on your most locked-in customers. You'll reduce headcount through natural attrition. You'll run the business for maximization of cash. Your revenue will, of course, decline, but your operating margins will go from small numbers to maybe as high as 35, 40, maybe 50%. You'll generate more cumulative cash in the next 5 years than in the last 10. So when would that make sense? Well, you've missed the window for maybe transformation. Your market is genuinely dying. When private equity would do the same thing anyway, but take all the value. At least this way, shareholders and employees who stick around participate in that cash generation. So there were 7 strategies, 7 completely different paths. But here's one decision framework. You pick one, commit fully, execute ruthlessly, because half measures fail. You cannot do head-to-head transformation and niche domination. You'll starve both strategies. You cannot do premium positioning and operational excellence. They require opposite organizational cultures. You cannot do platform pivot and keep competing directly. Your partners won't trust you. So most boards waste 2 to 4 years debating strategy. They then choose a strategy, but hedge by keeping too much in the legacy business. Then when results don't come fast enough, they switch strategies after 18 months. This is how companies die, not from choosing the wrong strategy, but from never really fully committing to any. And the reality is that any of these strategies can work, but only if you fully commit. And that's why the next part matters so much. The difference between transformations that succeed and those that fail come down to one critical principle. Before I tell you what it is, let me show you what it looks like in practice, because this is where it gets real. This is where good intentions meets organizational reality. Microsoft, under Nadella, as we heard earlier, when he became CEO in 2014, Microsoft was synonymous with 2 things, Windows and Office. That's where the money was. That's where the power was. Those divisions controlled everything. And he said, we're going all in Azure, we're becoming cloud first. For a moment, think about what that meant politically for him. The Windows division, the crown jewel of Microsoft for 30 years, was about to be demoted. Office, printing money, would now serve Azure's strategy, not the other way around. So leaders had to choose. Protect Windows and Office or build the future. As I mentioned earlier, 8 times market cap growth, but it took 5 to 7 years. Not quarters, years of internal warfare, of reorgs, of Windows executives leaving, of completely rewriting performance metrics and incentive structures. What about Apple with the iPhone? Go back to 2007. The iPod was printing money, hugely profitable, the hottest product in consumer electronics. And Steve Jobs, well, he said, we're going to cannibalize it. The iPhone would make the iPod obsolete on purpose. Inside Apple, people thought he was crazy. Why would you destroy your own profitable product? But Jobs, being Jobs, understood. Someone was going to cannibalize the iPod. It had better be them. That's not a process change, that's an existential courage moment. Adobe's another interesting one. Adobe's move to subscription is another story we can learn from. So it's 2012, and they had the perfect business selling software licenses. They had predictable revenue. Happy shareholders, and they said, we're going subscription only. They accepted a 3-year revenue decline deliberately. Can you imagine those board meetings? We're going to make less money for 3 years, and you need to trust us. Wall Street hammered them. Analysts downgraded them. Customers revolted. The stock tripled afterwards. But only because leadership had the courage to accept short-term pain for that long-term transformation. Can you notice the pattern? Leadership has the courage to destroy current success. Not optimize it, destroy it. It took cultural revolutions, not just process tweaks and changes. Microsoft didn't just add cloud, they restructured everything. 5 to 7 year timelines accepted, not 18-month transformation programs. Structural separation of innovation from the core. Adobe could have gone to a subscription model whilst preserving the licensing model. But they didn't. Now let me show you the other side. General Electric tried to transform through FastWorks their lean startup initiative. They did everything right, by convention at least. They trained over 5,000 leaders in the lean startup methodology. They invested millions. They brought in Eric Ries himself. They created an innovation group. But their culture had one unbreakable rule. Failure is not an option. And the Lean Startup's core principle, fail fast. You can't have both. You can't say embrace failure in training and failure ends career and performance reviews. What we call the organizational antibodies won. The training programs got funded, the innovation group got marginalized, and the culture never changed. Knowledge existed, execution failed. What about Borders versus Barnes & Noble in that shift to digital? Of course, both faced the same threat. Amazon, ebooks, digital disruption. Borders' CEO called the internet an adjunct to retail, something to add to the core business of physical stores. Barnes & Noble CEO called it a transformative opportunity, something that would fundamentally change what the business was. So here we've got the same market, the same threat, just different framing. Borders is bankrupt. Barnes & Noble survived by becoming a different company. So the difference wasn't knowledge. Both CEOs saw the internet coming. The difference was whether they treated transformation as addition or revolution. I'm also old enough to remember Nokia. Here's what kills me about Nokia. They had the touchscreen technology before the iPhone was launched. Their engineers built it. They demonstrated it. But the organization couldn't execute it. Middle managers were terrified of cannibalizing the existing phone business. The culture rewarded not making mistakes and not taking risks. Political infighting paralyzed decision-making. And when the iPhone launched, Nokia's leadership knew they were in trouble. But by then, organizational fear and cultural dysfunction had already won. So look at the pattern. Half measures everywhere. Training without cultural change. GE taught lean startup but kept failure is not an option. Ambiguous framing. Is this an opportunity or a threat? An addition or a revolution? When leadership isn't clear, the organization defaults to protecting what exists already. Organizational antibodies won every single time. The immune system protects the status quo and tries to defeat the change agents. That knowledge existed. Execution failed. Nokia had the technology. Borders understood e-commerce. GE knew about lean startup. Knowing didn't actually matter. So here's what I think you need to understand. The companies that transformed didn't just make better choices. They paired those choices with the organizational capability to execute them. Microsoft didn't just decide on the cloud, they restructured the entire company to make cloud decisions easy and Windows decisions hard. Apple didn't just build the iPhone. They created a team structurally separated from the iPod division so organizational antibodies couldn't kill it. Adobe didn't just announce subscriptions. They changed every metric, every incentive, every process to make the subscription model succeed even when it hurt. The companies that failed, they made good strategic choices, but they expected the existing org to execute them. You cannot execute transformation with the same organizational structures, incentives, and cultures that succeed in the old world. So when I show you a roadmap in a moment, understand, this isn't a process upgrade. Strategy and change and becoming a market leader involves an organizational revolution. The question isn't whether you understand what needs to change. The question is normally whether you have the courage to actually change it, because half measures don't just fail slowly. As we've discussed and as we've seen, they usually fail catastrophically. That's why we talk about the paired investment principle, because transformation fails when you separate strategy from execution. So for every strategic choice, you must ask 4 questions. What execution capability must exist for this to work? What organizational impediment will kill this if we don't address it? What are we stopping to create capacity? And who has decision authority to execute this daily? Microsoft didn't just say cloud first. They asked what capabilities must exist, and the answer was different sales comps, different technical skills, different customer success models. What impediment will kill this? As you've heard, the Windows division protecting that desktop dominance. What are we stopping? Well, making Windows the center of strategy. Who has decision authority? Nadella himself, personally, restructuring the entire org chart. If you can't answer all 4 questions with specific, concrete actions, not aspirations, you're probably not making a good strategy. You're probably making a wish list. And wish lists get killed by organizational antibodies nearly every single time. But here's a trusted path. And you will need to accept the timeline and remember that half measures fail. In months 1 to 3, you can do a strategic reset if you need to. Leadership alignment with brutal honesty about your current state's needed. You'll need a deep customer obsession, understanding the real problems you're there to solve. You'll choose 3, 4, 5 priorities, and you'll publicly kill everything else. And you implement a framework like OKRs to execute those priorities, but not in a thin average way. You'll master that skill, that capability, and you'll embed it deeply inside the organization to operate in an outcome-orientated way. And for every OKR that you create, you'll resource them properly. And the impact is you'll get some quick wins, but you will also trigger those organizational antibodies. And that's where most transformations die. But we can push through. So in months 4 to 12, you'll be making foundational changes. You'll be building psychological safety so people can speak the truth to you, to power. You'll optimize your organization, people, roles, goals, those team topologies, those reporting structures. You'll need to build metric maturity to measure what truly matters, that anchors into your strategy. You'll sync performance management and incentives, all those things that we've talked about as failure points, with those new priorities. And you'll optimize time through meeting policies, protecting deep work and other initiatives. You'd also deploy AI and automations. How can we speed things up? And the impact, well, those OKRs will be felt. They'll be felt in the KPIs that you really care about. You'll be hearing conversations shift from what we're doing, those activities, to outcomes. But the resistance will also peak here. And this is where your commitment is really everything. But the good news is in year 1, 2, 3, and beyond, with commitment, new behaviors become habits. Metrics fully shift from activities to outcomes. Cross-functional collaboration and innovation naturally improves. And that compound effect creates insurmountable advantage. And this is when you pull away. This is when that gap opens. There's no right or best time to have a strategy that you believe in and that executional efficiency compounding it. What I can tell you is every quarter of inaction compounds and the gap widens. So while you're debating, your competitors are compounding. While you're forming committees, they're building that advantage. And the mathematics is truly unforgiving. So here's what we do at ZOKRI. We pair every strategic choice with the execution framework to deliver it. Because the multiplier only works when both dimensions improve together. We work with leadership teams to develop clear, decisive strategies, and then we translate them into executable OKRs that remove ambiguity. Teams know exactly what they're building towards, with cross-functional collaboration and productivity optimized, and really fast learning loops that adapt as you go, embedded. Choices and time at every level of your org will get optimized, and execution efficiency compounds it. That's who we are. We're ZOKRI, and we create strategies that move.